Today, we're digging into neurodiversity and what it means in real life for us and maybe for your life too.
Raising neurodivergent kids is messy, beautiful, and a lot. I'm Mary Ellen Yates, and this is Growing Together, Neurodiversity at Home. Let's figure it out together.
Okay, let's get started. So, neurodiversity can be a very broad topic. It's also a very controversial topic. There are a lot of thoughts on this topic. I'm going to be talking from the lens of a parent that is trying to raise neurodiverse children while also being neurodiverse herself. And I also want to say that there is a huge range of neurodiversity. So, what may be true for my kids may not be for yours, but hopefully this helps. So, neurodiversity refers to how a brain functions and processes information. Most believe that neurodiversity starts in utero, so you're born with it. There can be differences in thinking, learning, and behavior. That's different than neurotypical. If you'd like more information about what a neurotypical person is classified as, you can check out my other video concerning that. Since this is something that starts in utero, let's talk about some of the brain differences that occur. The cerebral cortex is one. It's responsible for higher order functioning, behavior, and language. We have the amygdala and hippocampus. They're related to emotion regulation and memory. And then we have neuroconnectivity. Neurodiverse people can have overconnectivity and underconnectivity in different parts of their brain. And these can lead to challenges in social cues, sensory information, and communication. This is an area of study that's still being studied a lot. So far, research shows that there are two main factors in creating a neurodiverse individual. One of those is genetics, and the other is environmental. There are genes that are linked to a higher instance of having neurodiversity, though the genes alone do not determine whether you're neurodiverse, but they can increase the likelihood of a diagnosis. But you don't necessarily have to have these genes. You also have to have the clinical presentation. Also, another factor is environment. Environmental factors could be parental age, mother's health during pregnancy, and prenatal exposure to environmental toxins. I definitely believe this is true for my family. This is what we've witnessed. My husband has ADHD and dyslexia. I've been diagnosed with ADHD so far. Both my parents had ADHD. There's some learning difficulties in our family as well. And then for my kiddos, I have a son that has been diagnosed with ASD, ADHD, dyscalculia, and dyslexia. And then I have another one that has been diagnosed with ASD. And there's likely another diagnosis coming for motor planning difficulties, but we don't have one yet for that. And the others are still young and we're still waiting, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something around the corner diagnosis wise for them as well. So, for environmental factors, I think it's interesting because my first two kiddos who already have some neurodivergent diagnoses, it was obvious pretty young that there was, especially looking back, that there were some differences. And I had both of those pregnancies and births in Louisiana, which is, I think, 49th in pollution in our country. So there's definitely a higher environmental pollutant risk there. And then for my last two kiddos, I was pregnant with them in Germany. I delivered my third child there, and then my fourth one a couple months later, I delivered in Georgia. But for the majority of my pregnancy, I was in Germany, and they have a lower pollutant risk, especially compared to Louisiana. So it's interesting because my first two, they had a lot of more developmental delays and they're still in therapies working on those. My younger two, they were crawling really early, they were walking early. So they seem developmentally to be doing a lot different than my other ones that were still within range, but they were on the later side of what's considered normal developmentally. So, some common early signs of neurodivergence are difficulties in social cues and interactions, communication challenges, repetitive behaviors, and restrictive interests. Now, these things can change over time. but the characteristics can still be there. There can be a lot of bias with neurodiversity, and there's a large spectrum of different symptoms of neurodivergence. And so it looks differently for different people. For me, I had a lot of the internal symptoms, so I wasn't diagnosed until later in life because I didn't realize I was supposed to be sharing what was going on inside. It's way more common to diagnose a boy than a girl. That doesn't mean girls don't have it. It's just that they present differently. So, some reasons why someone might not get diagnosed until later in life could be lack of testing in their local area. It could be less obvious symptoms or not noticing any struggles, lack of funding to get testing, parents choosing not to get testing, parents not knowing the sign of neurodivergence and relating symptoms that they're seeing to other things instead, fear of the diagnosis. For mental health, there's still a stigma out there, and oftentimes people are afraid of mental health or neurodivergent diagnoses versus physical medical diagnoses. I feel like people are more willing to share that, and they might not be as willing to share about neurodiversity. You could also have a medical professional that is not as up to date on the research on neurodivergence and what they should be looking for. I'm sure you could come up with many other reasons too. What are some reasons why you might have gotten diagnosed later in life, or a reason why your kiddo got diagnosed later? Feel free to share those answers in the comments below. For us, it was a combination of reasons. I was 40 years old before I got diagnosed, and I just put the pieces together on my own. And then I saw a professional that helped me navigate the diagnosis. And as a child, looking back, I can see all these symptoms that I didn't know. For one, I was a kid, so I didn't know that I should be looking for these symptoms, but I can see why they were missed. I had a lot of sleep issues. I was always very restless, but I would find things to occupy my time. Like I always had a book, I always had arts and crafts, I always had something with me so that I wouldn't get bored. I didn't struggle in school, so I didn't raise any flags with my teachers. I remember a teacher teaching us to look at the top of someone's nose when you're looking at them if you don't want to make eye contact so that people think you're looking at them. So I used to do that a lot as a kid. The stimming that I used to do was less obvious stimming. And if someone noticed, I would stop those things. Like I used to twiddle my thumb. Someone mentioned it, I would stop. And things that I would do to get out that excess energy would be I would bite on my tongue or I'd wiggle my toes. I do sway a lot when I'm sitting. So little things like that that weren't as noticeable, so people didn't pick up on them. So that was for me why I was diagnosed late in life, even with two parents that had it and a sister that had it. So it was something that was in our household and that I was exposed to. But for my oldest, we knew at a young age that he had ADHD. We just didn't do the testing until later because I didn't see a need for it at the time. He tried preschool for a little while and it didn't work out. So then I just decided to homeschool him. So I was like, well, since he's not in the school, what's the point? Looking back, I probably would have made a different decision, but it's all part of our journey. And I can understand why parents decide to wait, even if they do think that they have a kid with a neurodivergence. So with ADHD, I was pretty familiar with it, but with autism, that was something that was not on the radar for me or my husband. We both didn't know anyone in our families with autism. And so when my second son, looking back, he had symptoms right from birth, but we didn't really pick up on those because he was a louder baby and he was a little more cranky and he needed to nurse a lot through the night. And there was all these little things that we just dealt with. And then as he was getting older, around 3 years old, he started toe walking more. And I was noticing sensory issues more. And he was getting pickier and pickier with his food. And he would only wear certain clothes. I just started noticing all these things, but I wasn't really sure what it was. And I kept Googling it, trying to find out. He did have eye contact, but then I realized later on it was mostly just with me, but with my husband or other people, he didn't. And so it was just very confusing. It wasn't cut and dry. Before I had kids, I was a pediatric ICU nurse. So I saw a lot of kids with autism, but they were pretty developmentally delayed and pretty sick. So that was my baseline. And so I was expecting a kid that had a lot more difficulties than my son had. And overall, like he was able to meet his milestones even if they were behind. So I didn't realize that that's what it was. And it wasn't until I had a friend who had a daughter that was diagnosed as high functioning autism, where when I was discussing with her, she said, I think your son also has autism. And then that's when I started looking into it and then found someone that was willing to assess him for a diagnosis. So it took a while. I didn't know what I was looking for. So it took a while to figure it out. Also, with my oldest, we ended up figuring out that he has dyslexia and then later dyscalculia. And that wasn't on our radar either. My husband grew up needing special ed just for spelling, and they said he had a spelling disorder. But then when I was trying to teach my son how to read, I had a lot of hard times. It took forever. Things weren't happening. At the end of first grade, he started complaining about his eyesight. And so then I was like, oh, he can't read because he can't see. So I got him reading glasses. And then second grade hit and he still was not reading. And so I was like, okay, something's wrong here. I don't know what to do. So I contacted the local school and I got him tested and it classified as specific learning disorder in reading and writing. So he had that diagnosis. And so we were able to go from there. But then I read Overcoming Dyslexia, which was recommended by the counselor at the school. And that was really helpful. And we realized that my husband also has dyslexia. He just wasn't diagnosed with it. So, again, it was something that was in our family genetically, but we didn't pick up on it because we didn't realize that we had it. So that's why those things were delayed for our family. And now we're looking at my second son, and we're noticing that he's having a hard time with his motor planning and coordination. So we're still in the process of getting diagnoses and figuring out exactly how we can help our kiddos. I think it's important to get diagnoses. For one, these diagnoses can be tricky and there's a huge spectrum of symptoms. And I don't want to misdiagnose my kids. When you get a diagnosis, a lot of times there's resources involved with that. And if you have the wrong diagnosis, you might not be getting the best resources for your child. So I think it's important to have medical professionals in there that have a lot of experience with diagnoses so that you can find the best resources for your kids. Because I think my kids are wonderful and they have so many talents and so many interests. And I just want to help them have as many skills as they can so that they can be successful adults. And that success is going to be based on what they choose that they want to do in life. But I don't want to not be able to provide services for them and for it to be harder for them to do something that they would want to do. So I'm just trying to provide options for them, and so that's why I think it is important to know whether you're neurodiverse. And I also think it helps with self identity and self esteem. As my oldest son said over and over before we got diagnosis, why is my brain like this? Why do I have a hard time? He knew that there was something different about his brain, but he didn't know why. And it really created a lot of low self esteem. And I think with us, when we don't know what is causing the behavior that he's having, we might approach it in the wrong way. And then that can be frustrating for all of us as well. So when he's gotten his diagnoses, I've shared with him right away, and he's actually felt better about himself because he knows that there's a reason. And then since it's genetic, his father or I usually have these diagnoses for the most part, and so he's able to see, oh, okay, they have it. It's not that big of a deal. And then he can learn about what worked for us. And I think it helps him feel like he's not alone. And that just because he has struggles, it doesn't mean it'll always be a struggle. And if it does, it's okay sometimes to do hard things. And we share those strengths and struggles with him. So I think it's important to have those diagnoses. What do you think? Do you think it's important to have the diagnoses? Why do you choose to get them or not to get them? Just let me know how you feel about it. And as we were talking about diagnoses, I was just going to list some of the diagnoses in the neurodivergent category. Autism spectrum disorder, also called ASD. It's characterized by differences in social communication, sensory processing, and repetitive behaviors. There's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also called ADHD. And usually, with this diagnosis, you see a lot of challenges with focus, impulsivity, and often hyperactivity, but a kid isn't necessarily physically hyperactive. There's dyspraxia, which is a motor planning difficulty. that can affect coordination and physical movement. There are many different types of learning differences. Here are some of the more well-known ones. Dyslexia. In the school system, if you get tested, they're going to call it specific learning disability. In reading, it's going to take a lot longer to gain automaticity. Dyslexia is not just about reading, it can go into other parts of your life, like being able to read time and knowing your left from your right and other things as well. They can also have an issue putting thoughts down on paper, and that would be a written expression disorder. There's also dyscalculia. Dyscalculia would be difficulty with math reasoning and also with numbers. Dyscalculia in the school setting can also be called specific learning disability in math. Another diagnosis would be obsessive compulsive disorder. Tourette's is another one where there's involuntary movement and tics. Processing disorder, there's debate about whether processing disorder can be its own diagnosis, but it can affect one or multiple senses, such as sight, hearing, sound, smell. It also can affect other senses like balance and body awareness. Some may be sensitive to sensory input. My oldest son has a hard time with loud noises, while others may be under responsive and seek out sensory experiences, kind of like my second son. With these neurodiversities, there can be struggles. There can also be a lot of strengths that they have with these diagnoses as well, which are pretty awesome and amazing. And it's so interesting to see how our bodies and our brains can be so different. So, lastly, I'd like to talk about some specific struggles and strengths that I've seen in my family. Some struggles are low self esteem because they know something is different, but they don't understand why they're different. Challenges keeping and making friends, learning struggles, restlessness and hyperactivity, issues with toileting, disorganization, initiating and completing tasks, difficulty learning life skills, fine and gross motor delays, emotional dysregulation, sleep issues, clumsiness, frequent injuries, holding attention, impulsivity, difficulty with direction, time blindness, and these are just some that come off the top of my head. There are more, but I also want to point out that with these struggles, there's something you can do about it. You can go to different specialists that can help. Some specialists include speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. There's behavioral health specialists, ABA therapists. There's many different types. My kids see quite a few of these on a regular basis. And another thing that I want to point out for people that are neurodivergent, while something might be a struggle at first, oftentimes they just need to be taught the skill and how to do it. And then they can often do that skill with practice. So a lot of skills are just not automatic like they might be for a neurotypical person, but that doesn't mean they can't do it. Okay, so let's talk about some strengths that I've seen in my family. Generosity, helpfulness, empathy, noticing patterns, problem solving and thinking outside the box, learning perseverance, great memory, ability to mentally picture 3D objects and how they relate and fit into other things, solving complicated math problems in their head. We call my dad the human calculator. It's very impressive. The ability to quickly become an expert in a certain topic of high interest, developing new skills seemingly quickly in those high interest areas, being fun, adventurous, having unique interests, and willing to take risks. So that's where I would like to end talking about neurodiversity. There'll be many other videos talking about it more. But I would like to know what strengths or struggles that your family has with the neurodiversity. What stands out to you, especially if I haven't mentioned them already. Please comment below. I'd love to hear back from you, and I'd love to keep this conversation going. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.